Hello, SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, and I have some more things interesting to share, and they've been connected. I'll put together a playlist in regards to the angles of the Great Pyramid, the Nile Delta, but the important thing here is survey. So the modern world, but also the ancient world, survey was essential. So the ancient Egyptians were skilled surveyors. We see even their ceremonies connected to surveying on their temple walls. Well, still now. Now, surveying is connected to arithmetic, astronomy, and geometry. So the tools of surveying are also the tools of astronomy. And geometry is especially important because geometry, geo, earth, metry, measure. Geometry is the study of earth measure. And that brings us to this projection of the Great Pyramid to Alexandria and Port Said and the angles connected therein. Now I'll put the link in a description. The videos The Great Pyramid and Testing the Nile Delta Projection. This will lead to a series of some very other interesting connections in regards to surveying where certain places are and the distances between them being very, very, very important, and especially Pythagorean schools, which are, of course, were developed from ancient Egypt. So, for instance, Plato stated that the Nile Valley was the origin of geometry. We also see highly advanced geometry in Sumer and these earliest Mesopotamian cultures. So previous episodes I looked at the pyramid angles and the measures and tested that, and we saw how very, very close it comes to, well, it does run right down the guts of Port Said, just off to the east of Alexandria, but there are other factors to include, because the delta, it's the delta. The delta it's dynamic a little bit more, but also if you include slight variations, but it's far, far more true than it is untrue, and it is very, including variations in the measure. These were based on idealized measures. There are all little variations in the pyramid, and from what I've done off to the side so far, well, it's frankly amazing, the accuracy into there. You need to include the small variations on the pyramid. It's not 756 feet on any one side. Each side is slightly different. When you include these things, you get an amazing level of geometric earth measure knowledge, especially astronomy as well. So this projection would have the pyramid upside down, but also there are other links to that. But that's, for instance, those are the angles, and these are based on the idealized measures. So the half base 220 Egyptian royal cubits, or 440 Egyptian royal cubits, the total base. There we see the angles, and multiply these by 1000. This is the projection that you get, and the angles included. Now, why is that interesting? Previously, episodes I mentioned Cleopatra's Needles, which were originally in Heliopolis, which was referred to. Well, it was a mound. It's been referred to as one of the mound that rose above the floods, and these Heliopolitan obelisks have been moved to Rome, New York, and London, such as Cleopatra's in London. Now, Cleopatra, there were several Cleopatras, including one Cleopatra the Alchemist, but Cleopatra 7 is the one that's most famous. Cleopatra and Antony, for instance, she moved two of these obelisks to Alexandria to build essentially a temple honoring the Romans, and these two needles, obelisks, were then moved, one to New York and one to London, and now called Cleopatra's Needles. They were not actually made by her, she just moved them to Heliopolis. Now, link in the description also to this video, New York on the Nile, I called it, and the obelisks and the connections to the geometry, math, symbolism of these ancient cultures in New York, and so also here in Sydney. I'll do that in the follow-up. But Cleopatra's Needle in London, for instance, there's an obelisk here in Sydney in Hyde Park. It is it was built to honour Cleopatra's Needle in London. I'll get to that. But so we have the Great Pyramid and these angles, and what has it got to do with Cleopatra's Needles, apart from the fact that they were moved from Egypt? So let's have a look at London from the air. And there we see the location of Cleopatra's Needle. And there's a lot more to come, actually. A lot. This is really cool stuff. Now, Cleopatra's Needle, that's where it is. Now, just off here, we have the City of London. This is London City. But the City of London is a small area, basically encompassed, enclosed in there. Now, the City of London, originally known as Londinium, was founded by the Romans 43 AD, and the boundaries of the City of London, of a mile, are still basically define the City of London or Londinium as it was back then. Now, I'll put a link in the description to a video I did on the City of London and how it's connected, well, to the Vatican and New York. Now, what is in the Vatican? Also Egyptian obelisk. What's in New York? Egyptian obelisk. They're also capital cities of the world capitals. Now, and they also have, well, many other connections. The link will be in a description to that, because there are a handful of cities around the world with the geometry, the architecture, but also the legal, political, religious power of these cities is very, very important and separates them from the rest. Now, what's important, one of the defining things of London is the River Thames. The Romans called it Thamassus, and the Thames is still referred to as the Isis. Now, this is a map from around about 1900. River Thames, or the Isis, the famous, at Oxford they have the rowing, they even call that the Isis River. Now, also running through the middle of London, we're at the Royal Greenwich Observatory. Very important links here in regards to the pyramid timekeeping and other, but we have the prime meridian. This is the center line of the world. This is the navel. We can call this the navel of the world as it is now. All our GPS is based on this point. Makes it very, very important. So it's not just that the City of London is this financial capital, and still London being, especially for Commonwealth nations, but still for the world, a very important centre of political, financial power, and also for mapping, science and technology, weights and measures being based here. So this brings us back to this point I brought up in the end, because he's going to connect a lot of different things. But what we have is Charles Piazza Smythe was this famous Egyptologist, but he was more importantly a very important astronomer, because an astronomy, weights and measures, survey are connected. So, for instance, Piazza Smythe was very important in setting up the standard time systems in the US. Very important in standing. He was Astronomer Royal in Scotland. He also established the official clock, the important timekeeping element in London, and the prime meridian and London are very important, because timekeeping and navigation and survey and measure all go together. You can't separate them. They're all hermetic. Who was Thoth? God of weights and measures, of science. Who was Hermes? Hermes Trismegistus, the god of weights and measures, science, commerce. What do people engaged in commerce do? They need to navigate. Time, distance, angles, all connected. And this brings us back to this concept of the Giza Plateau, especially the Great Pyramid being the geographical centre of the world. Now, you can look this up. There are, depending on the method you use, the geographical land centre of the Earth can be either in Turkey, up in sort of central Turkey, but but also by the Mercator projection method, it also would be at Giza. So, strictly speaking, it's hard to exactly define this, but let's just put it symbolically, spiritually, it forms a centre of the world in that way, in the same way that London is a centre of the world, the same way that New York is a centre of the world, the same way that the Vatican is a centre of the world, or as well with Jerusalem. There are some really cool, all of these are actually really intricately connected politically, in a religious sense, but also in well, symbolic, but in many other ways. And so the Great Pyramid, the centre of the Earth, original, some wanted it to be the prime meridian. Charles Piazza Smythe was part of this really interesting movement. They wrote, they were part, and they published magazines which had presidents as members of them, talking about the Great Pyramid and the encoding knowledge, encoding science, especially weights and measures. But the centre of the world, London, centre of the world, Giza, and some other cities as well. So now we have London on the Isis and these connections. And so Cleopatra's Needle, and how does it work? How does it point towards the Giza plateau, especially of a Great Pyramid, bringing us back to this projection of the Great Pyramid. So what is the Suez Canal? Port Said is the northern entrance of the Suez Canal. Commerce, navigation. Hermes, weights and measures, commerce, navigation, science. All of them come in exquisitely together. There is no science without weights and measures. There is no navigation without weights and measures and science. There is no commerce. There is no society. There is no, well, maybe not society, but there is no civilization. There is no economy. These things cannot exist without geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, music, the quadrivium, incorporating weights and measures and navigation through commerce and trade. Now, standards of anyway, that's separate. Now, this projection of the Great Pyramid on the Nile Delta. Well, let's have a look at that. So, if we draw a line between Cleopatra's Needle and the Great Pyramid, it's 3,513 kilometers or 2,183 miles. And that line, if we extend it, that's how close it is. Now, that the pyramid is 8-sided, and so there are indentations which slightly change the angle, which actually accounts for that. But just using again the idealized measures of the pyramid, there is a slight variations on each side, and with this you can actually account exactly for this variation, because it's but as it stands now, using idealized the standard measures, it's 0.08 of 1 degrees off. This yellow line goes directly to Cleopatra's Needle. And there she is there, which is outside the MI5 or MI6 headquarters. But just as a, let's look this up. So we go down to the Great Pyramid. You see those projections there. Put our point there on the center. And now let's fly to Cleopatra's Needle. There's the obelisk there. Center of the obelisk. And 2,183 miles. 3,513 kilometers. I'm not blowing smoke here. This is actually what it is now. There are some other important sites in London, very important especially Greenwich Royal Observatory and the London Stone, which is very important in the esoteric traditions. Now, okay, we already made that line there, so let's fly back over to Great Pyramid. And there we go. And now up to Pharos. And you can see the angle there, 321.92. To be precise to those idealized measures of the pyramid, as I mentioned, that would be 321.84. We are 0.08 degrees off. So you get an idea of how close this particular line is. And so with that, there's actually a lot more to come. This is just an intro because it's importantly, the links will be just in the description to the earlier videos. This not only might be a fluke with London being the center of the world, the prime meridian, but the ancient centers of the world, the important primordial mounds and omphalos, or the navel stones, the centers of the world, especially, actually we're going to link up, so here you go, you can test this, and we'll, I'll get back to, so more to come on this, but Cleopatra's Needle, especially if you include the slight variations on each side of a pyramid and include the fact that it's 8-sided, this 0.08 degrees, which is interesting enough, comes down to 0.00000 if you include all the relevant factors. And so with that, have a good one. More to come. Cheers.